Hello, my name is Brandon. If you are normal like me, you probably also have a not-so-normal family member. You know, the Uncle Larrys, the Grandpa Lesters. Well, I have a lot of, not to be rude or anything, pretty weird people in my family, especially my cousin, Johnny. You see, when Johnny was young, he had a pretty bad accident, in which he suffered a severe head injury. My family didn't think he would make it, and we still don't know what caused it. But, by some miracle, he lived. But he was never the same. This kid went from being the average 9-year-old to a mentally deranged psycho. He would do violent things, like beat up kids in school, threaten to kill his parents, and even attack people with weapons. This resulted in him being sent to a mental facility for a whole week. But that just made the situation worse than before. He started directly attacking the family more than anyone else. At this point in time, he began to grow a strange obsession with the occult. He started drawing pentagrams on the walls in his house, and also developed a habit of loudly chanting unintelligible words, apparently trying to summon a demon. Once again, they admitted him to a mental facility, and his occult activities got worse. However, the worst was yet to come, and trust me, it gets ugly fast. This whole occult situation with Johnny met a breaking point about a year ago, after I was invited to their house, and John wasn't home. My aunt and uncle served us a delicious dinner, and everyone was actually having a good time. A first in a long time. However, I knew what was on my mind from the start of this visit. You see, at this point in my life, I had actually only heard of Johnny's strange habits while overhearing my mom over the phone, and I wasn't buying it. After this, my aunt and uncle offered that I sleep over, because Johnny was sleeping over at one of his friends' houses too, his friends also being weird cultist freaks. However, their tones immediately changed when they told me in a very serious tone to never, ever go in Johnny's room. However, once everyone was asleep, I immediately proceeded to break the one rule they gave me. Congratulations, young me, you had one job. However, I didn't realize until months later that this action single-handedly saved the lives of my entire family. I slowly opened the door, and luckily didn't make a peep. However, I was pretty disturbed by what I saw inside his room. The walls were painted a dark grey color, and on the walls were posters of black metal bands, and other disturbing images. Now, I know it's not really a good thing to do, but yes, I did snoop around inside his room. One of the first things I found was a fire truck red box. I opened it, and inside were a bunch of photos of his cultist activities and other private photos. One that stood out to me was a picture of him in lingerie, with several bloody cuts on his arms, legs, and even his privates. This heavily disturbed me, because I could tell that the photo was taken by someone else, due to a massive shadow in frame. By the way, Johnny is 18, so this is still technically legal. However, still quite horrifying that he would do this kind of stuff to himself. After that photo, I saw even worse images. One of them was Johnny being cut on his back by another person, supposedly the same person who took the other photo. And to make it even worse, what looked like an unholy concoction of blood and semen was covering the wounds. Now, this almost made me throw up, because I have an extreme disgust for shit like this, and I had to physically hold back my vomit. Then, the worst one. It was a photo of Johnny fornicating with what looked like a human corpse. Oh my fucking god, this image is still burned in my brain, and most likely will be for years to come. This time, I did not succeed in holding back my vomit, and had to quietly upchuck in Johnny's trash bin. Now I know he is mentally handicapped, but this is too far. Even if he's a schizophrenic maniac, this just wasn't something that could be done by the average psycho. Then I heard something. It sounded like a door opening, so I quietly closed the door to Johnny's room. I peeped out a little bit and saw Johnny. He had come home early, but something else caught my attention. Behind him was a massive silhouette, and I mean huge, but I still couldn't tell what it was. He was standing there, menacingly. Then I heard a noise, a horrible, disgusting, buzzing noise. It sounded as if a kaiju-sized wasp was inside the house. However, I still couldn't tell what it was. After that, my aunt and uncle woke up and came out to see what was going on. They asked him why he was here so early and what that sound was. Then their faces immediately turned to horror, of complete terror, as I could tell that they could see what that big silhouette was behind him. Then, faster than a speeding car, I saw a blur quickly dart towards my uncle, and he went hurtling in the same direction. I quietly turned to see what had happened, and I was met with a nightmarish sight. On top of my uncle was what looked like a colossal hornet, bigger than me. It was a disgusting vomit green color, with dark violet stripes. That horrible thing was the culprit for the loud buzzing sound. My uncle had been stabbed in the stomach, with blood furiously gushing from his wound. My aunt screamed as she began to sob loudly, as it was obvious he had already died. "This is the reckoning of the Lord. He shall rise from his prison and regain his throne in the heavens," Johnny said in a gravely hushed voice. He slowly walked towards my aunt and pulled out a switchblade. He began to slowly creep towards her in a perverted manner and tackled her to the ground as she let out a cry. He put the blade to her cheek with a toothy, mean-spirited grin on his face, as if he was having the time of his life. At this point, I couldn't stand this sight anymore, as I jumped out from the door I was hiding behind and tackled him to the floor as he did to my aunt. We struggled for the knife, but I ended up snatching it and slicing his cheek wide open, as blood splattered all over my clothes. He cried in pain and quickly ran into another room, blood dripping from his open wound. "Oh my God, are you okay? Are you hurt?" I asked my aunt frantically. I think so." She was interrupted by the buzzing sound again. I looked over and saw that hornet, that stupid fucking puke green death wasp. It began to charge at me at high speeds. I lifted the knife in front of me as a reflex and closed my eyes tightly. The monster darted right into the blade, cutting its face clean in half. Thick, chunky, blue blood gushed onto my face as it fell to the ground dead. Suddenly, the corpse spontaneously caught ablaze, engulfed in vibrant blue flames. I quickly dropped the blade as my aunt and I quickly rushed out the front door. Before I left, though, I looked back behind me, taking one last look at the doomed house. The monster's body had disappeared, and I saw Johnny slowly crawling towards me, begging for mercy. Even after all he had done, I, for some reason, decided to spare him a horrible death, and went back to help him. However, before I could walk back through the door, the ceiling collapsed, and Johnny was crushed. At this point, I was only concerned in my aunt being okay, so I ran out onto the sidewalk, but not before taking one last glance at the burning house behind me. However, before I could turn back, I was blinded by the brightest light I had ever seen, as I was sent flying in the other direction behind me. After recollecting myself, I opened my eyes to see the house completely caved in. Now, there was no saving the house. Soon, the police and fire department arrived, as I was rushed to the hospital. I was so exhausted that I passed out instantly after being put in the ambulance. I woke up the next day in a hospital room, alone. I felt horrible, and less than a minute later, the doctor came in. Apparently, I had cracked a rib during the explosion, as well as twisting my ankle. Before the doctor left, he turned on the TV, and the news was on. However, I became petrified with fear after the news people started talking. Breaking news today. A house exploded on Cherry Street last night. After searching the house, we found the body of 52-year-old Jonathan Harris Sr. Detectives suspect he was murdered by his 18-year-old son, Jonathan Harris Jr., who then proceeded to set the house on fire. Authorities also state that they discovered a stash of not-safe-for-work photography involving acts of masochism, BDSM, and even necrophilia. Witnesses say that John Jr. was in the house when it caught fire and exploded, and a 13-year-old named Lawrence Gordon was seen escaping the house with John Sr.'s wife, Mary Ann Harris. However, despite this, John Jr.'s remains were never found.